The fluorescent lights of Morrison's supermarket cast their harsh white glow across the checkout lanes as the evening rush began to wind down. Shopping carts rattled across worn linoleum floors, while the constant beeping of barcode scanners created a rhythmic soundtrack to the controlled chaos of a busy grocery store at closing time. Clara Evans stood behind register number 7, her thin frame slightly hunched as she processed the final customers of her 8-hour shift. At 24, she carried herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to make herself small in crowded spaces. Her dark hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and her new employee uniform, a navy blue polo shirt with the Morrison's logo, still looked stiff and unfamiliar on her shoulders. This was only Clara's 3rd day on the job, and the learning curve felt steeper than she had anticipated. The register system seemed designed to confuse rather than assist. The customer flow never paused long enough for her to catch her balance, and every transaction carried the weight of her desperation not to make mistakes that might cost her this opportunity. 20 feet away, stacking produce boxes with practiced efficiency, Ethan Cole moved through his assigned tasks with the fluid motions of someone who had done physical labor before. At 38, he possessed the kind of understated presence that allowed him to blend seamlessly into any environment. His graying temples were hidden beneath a Morrison's baseball cap, and his navy uniform looked exactly like everyone else's. What none of his temporary coworkers knew was that Ethan owned the entire Morrison's chain, over 200 stores across 3 states. He was 3 weeks into an undercover assignment he had designed himself, working as a seasonal employee to understand the reality of his company's operations from the ground level. The idea had come to him during a board meeting where executives discussed employee satisfaction metrics that seemed disconnected from the stories he occasionally heard through human resources. Ethan had built his business empire on the principle that success came from understanding every aspect of an operation, but he realized he had lost touch with the daily experience of the frontline workers who made his stores function. As the last customer left Clara's line, Ethan watched her shoulders sag with exhaustion that seemed disproportionate to the physical demands of the job. There was something about her careful movements and overly polite interactions with customers that suggested someone working under pressure that went beyond typical first-week nerves. The store manager had left an hour earlier, and most of the evening crew was finishing their closing tasks with the comfortable efficiency of people who had done this routine hundreds of times. But Clara remained at her register, methodically double-checking her drawer count with the precision of someone who couldn't afford to have any discrepancies. Ethan finished stacking his final boxes and was heading toward the employee break room to collect his jacket when he heard the sound that would change both of their lives. Soft, muffled sobs coming from behind the half-closed door. He paused, uncertain whether to intrude on what was clearly a private moment. But something about the quality of those tears, not the dramatic crying of temporary frustration, but the quiet, desperate weeping of someone who had reached the end of their emotional reserves, made him gently push the door open. Clara sat hunched over the small table in the center of the break room, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with the effort of trying to cry silently, and beside her sat an opened envelope that appeared to contain some kind of official correspondence. "Hey," Ethan said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Is everything okay? Can I help with anything?" Clara looked up quickly, her eyes red and puffy, clearly embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state. She wiped her face hastily with the back of her hand and tried to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "I didn't mean for anyone to see me like this. It's just—" She gestured helplessly at the envelope. "I really can't afford to seem weak here. This job is too important." Ethan stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, giving Clara the privacy she clearly needed, while offering his presence as support rather than intrusion. "Sometimes the most important jobs are the ones that feel impossible to do," he said gently. "What's going on?" Clara looked at this coworker she barely knew, weighing whether to trust him with the truth about her situation. Something in his eyes, a combination of genuine concern and patient attention, made her decision for her. Have you ever witnessed a moment that made you want to stop everything and really listen? And where are you watching this story? Maybe during a break from your own challenges? Share how you're feeling in the comments below. Clara's journey to that break room chair had been marked by a series of setbacks that had gradually eroded her confidence and depleted her resources. Just 3 months earlier, she had been working as a barista at Cafe Luna, a small independent coffee shop where she had found genuine satisfaction in creating perfect lattes and building relationships with regular customers. The cafe job had been ideal for Clara's situation. The hours were flexible enough to allow her to care for her mother, who had been battling chronic illness for the past 2 years. The tips supplemented her modest hourly wage, and the owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been understanding about the occasional schedule changes that came with being a caregiver. But small businesses operate on thin margins, and when the building's rent doubled due to neighborhood gentrification, Cafe Luna couldn't survive the financial pressure. Mrs. Rodriguez had given her employees as much notice as possible, but closing the cafe had still left Clara scrambling to replace income she couldn't afford to lose. Clara's mother, Patricia, suffered from a combination of diabetes and heart disease that required constant monitoring, expensive medications, and frequent medical appointments. At 58, Patricia had been forced into early retirement when her condition became too unpredictable for her to maintain regular employment. The small disability payments Patricia received covered only a fraction of their monthly expenses. Clara had become the primary breadwinner for their household while simultaneously serving as her mother's primary caregiver. A dual responsibility that left little time for the job search she desperately needed to conduct. Their apartment was a modest one-bedroom in an older building where Clara slept on the living room couch, so her mother could have the bedroom's easier access to the bathroom. The rent was affordable by neighborhood standards, but it still consumed more than half of Clara's income, leaving little margin for the medical expenses that seemed to multiply each month. Clara had applied for dozens of positions in the weeks following Cafe Luna's closure, but the job market proved more challenging than she had anticipated. Many employers wanted full-time availability that Clara couldn't provide due to her caregiving responsibilities. Others offered part-time hours that wouldn't generate enough income to cover their basic needs. The envelope sitting beside Clara in the break room contained the latest reminder that their rent was now 3 weeks overdue. The property management company had been patient initially, but their notices were becoming more frequent and more urgent. Clara calculated that they had perhaps 2 more weeks before facing eviction proceedings. When Morrison's had finally called Clara for an interview, she had felt a surge of hope that quickly turned to anxiety. The supermarket chain was known for steady employment and decent benefits, but the position was Clara's first experience with retail checkout, and she worried constantly about making mistakes that might cost her the job. The training period had been intensive but brief. 3 days of computer modules followed by supervised shifts that felt more like trial by fire than gradual acclimation. Clara approached each transaction with the hyper-vigilance of someone who understood that this job represented her family's lifeline. Her shifts at Morrison's were physically and emotionally exhausting in ways that her coffee shop work had never been. The pace was relentless, with customers queuing up faster than she could process their purchases. The computer system seemed designed for speed rather than user-friendliness, and Clara often felt like she was barely keeping up with the demands of each transaction. More challenging than the technical aspects of the job was the emotional labor required to maintain cheerful customer service while managing her own stress and exhaustion. Clara had always been naturally empathetic, but smiling and making small talk while worrying about her mother's medication costs and their overdue rent required a level of performance that drained her energy reserves. During her brief breaks, Clara would call to check on her mother, trying to assess Patricia's condition and mood from subtle cues in her voice. These conversations were necessarily brief, but they provided Clara with both comfort and additional worry about leaving her mother alone for such long periods. Clara's co-workers seemed kind, but were focused on their own responsibilities and challenges. As the newest employee, she felt hesitant to ask for help or admit when she was struggling with aspects of the job. She had learned from experience that showing vulnerability in workplace situations could be interpreted as inability to handle the position. The evening when Ethan found her crying had been particularly difficult. Clara had received the rent notice that morning, learned that her mother's insurance had denied coverage for a medication adjustment, and made 3 register errors during her shift that had required manager intervention to resolve. Sitting alone in the break room with the weight of all these pressures finally overwhelming her careful composure, Clara had allowed herself the luxury of tears she usually suppressed. She had chosen the break room because she thought it would be empty, giving her a few minutes to release the emotional pressure that had been building throughout her shift. The last thing she had expected was for a coworker to offer genuine concern about her well-being. Clara's experience had taught her to be self-reliant and to avoid burdening others with her problems. But something about this man's gentle approach made her consider the possibility of accepting support. Over the following days, Ethan found himself paying closer attention to Clara's work patterns and interactions, though he was careful to maintain the casual interest of a concerned coworker rather than anything that might seem like surveillance. What he observed challenged many of his assumptions about employee performance and workplace dynamics. Despite her obvious stress and the steep learning curve of her new position, Clara approached every customer interaction with genuine warmth and patience. Ethan watched her take extra time to help an elderly man count his change, explain store policies to confused shoppers without a trace of irritation, and maintain her composure even when customers became demanding or rude. During one particularly busy afternoon rush, Ethan witnessed an interaction that would stay with him for weeks. An elderly woman approached Clara's register with a small basket of items that included bread, milk, and a prescription medication bottle she was hoping to pay for at the pharmacy counter. As Clara scanned the woman's groceries, she gently explained that the pharmacy had closed for lunch, but would reopen in 30 minutes. The woman's face fell as she realized she would need to wait or make another trip to the store. "The medication is for my husband," the elderly woman explained. "He's waiting in the car and I promised I'd be quick." Clara glanced around the store, then made a decision that demonstrated both compassion and initiative. She called the pharmacy extension and explained the situation to the technician, who agreed to process the prescription quickly before taking her lunch break. But as the woman prepared to pay for her total purchase, she discovered that she was short $7, not enough to cover both the groceries and the medication she needed. Ethan watched from his position, restocking nearby shelves, as Clara faced a situation that had no easy solution. Store policy was clear about not advancing money to customers, and Clara was too new to have any authority to override pricing or payment procedures. Without hesitation, Clara reached into her own pocket and quietly added $7 to the woman's payment, processing the transaction as if the customer had provided the full amount. "Thank you so much, dear," the elderly woman said, unaware of Clara's personal contribution to her purchase. After the customer left, Ethan approached Clara during a brief lull in her line. "That was really kind of you," he said quietly. Clara looked embarrassed, as if she had been caught doing something inappropriate. "I know I'm not supposed to, but she really needed that medication. I figured $7 won't make or break me, but it might make a huge difference for her husband." Ethan was struck by Clara's matter-of-fact explanation. $7 represented a significant portion of an hourly wage for someone in her financial situation, yet she had given it without apparent internal debate. As the days passed, Ethan began to notice other small acts of generosity and service that Clara performed without drawing attention to herself. She stayed late to help train newer employees, took on extra cleaning tasks when the janitorial staff was shorthanded, and consistently volunteered for the most challenging shifts in customer service situations. But perhaps most remarkably, Clara maintained her positive attitude and work ethic, despite signs of increasing personal stress that were visible to anyone paying close attention. Ethan observed the way Clara's hands sometimes trembled slightly during quiet moments, suggesting the physical impact of sustained anxiety. He noticed how she checked her phone during every break, clearly monitoring something that required constant attention. He saw the careful way she counted her tips at the end of each shift, as if every dollar carried enormous significance. During their brief conversations in the break room, Clara occasionally mentioned her mother's health challenges, though she was clearly reluctant to provide details that might be seen as complaints or excuses for any performance issues. "How is your mom doing?" Ethan asked one afternoon, having heard Clara on the phone discussing medication schedules. "Some days are better than others," Clara replied diplomatically. "She's a fighter, though. We're managing." The word managing seemed to carry tremendous weight in Clara's vocabulary. Ethan began to understand that for Clara, managing meant maintaining control over circumstances that were fundamentally overwhelming through sheer force of will and determination. One evening, as they were both finishing their shifts, Ethan found Clara in the break room, staring at a notebook filled with columns of numbers that appeared to be budget calculations. "Big financial decisions?" he asked gently. Clara closed the notebook quickly, but not before Ethan glimpsed the meticulous tracking of expenses that suggested someone living with very little margin for error. "Just trying to figure out how to make everything work," Clara said with a tired smile. "You know how it is." But Ethan was beginning to understand that he didn't know how it was. Not really. Despite having grown up in a working-class family, his rise to executive leadership had insulated him from the day-to-day reality of financial insecurity that Clara navigated with such grace and determination. Watching Clara balance her cashier responsibilities while managing what were clearly significant personal challenges, Ethan began to question whether his stores were providing adequate support for employees facing similar situations. More than that, he was developing genuine respect and admiration for Clara as both a person and an employee, though she had no idea that her quiet strength was being observed by someone who had the power to change her circumstances. During the second week of working alongside Clara, Ethan began finding opportunities for casual conversations that might help him better understand her perspective on work, life, and the challenges facing employees at his company. These conversations took place during their shared 15-minute breaks, in the brief quiet moments before the store opened or while they worked adjacent tasks that allowed for easy dialogue. Ethan was careful to maintain his cover as a seasonal employee while gradually building the trust that would allow Clara to speak openly about her experiences. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said one afternoon as they sat at the small table in the employee break room, sharing the space with two other workers who were absorbed in their phones. Clara looked up from the sandwich she had packed from home, a simple meal that Ethan recognized as the kind of economical lunch someone might prepare when dining out wasn't an option. "Sure," Clara replied, though something in her expression suggested wariness about personal questions. "What made you decide to work in retail? Was this something you always wanted to do?" Clara's laugh carried no humor. "Honestly, I needed a job that offered steady hours and the possibility of benefits. I used to work at a coffee shop that I loved, but it closed when the rent got too expensive." She took a small bite of her sandwich before continuing. "I never imagined myself working in a grocery store, but sometimes life doesn't follow the plan you had in mind." Ethan nodded, recognizing the kind of practical decision-making that came from limited options rather than unlimited choices. "Do you miss the coffee shop?" "Every day," Clara admitted. "I knew all the regular customers' names and drink preferences. It felt more personal, like I was providing something that made people's mornings better." "Here," she gestured around the break room and toward the store beyond. "I'm just processing transactions as quickly as possible." This perspective struck Ethan as particularly significant. Clara was describing the difference between work that felt meaningful and work that felt purely transactional, even though both jobs involve customer service in retail environments. "What would make this job feel more meaningful?" Ethan asked. Clara considered the question seriously as she seemed to approach everything. "I think if there were more opportunities to actually help customers instead of just ringing up their purchases. Sometimes people need directions to find items, or they have questions about products, or they're dealing with payment issues that require more than just following standard procedures." She paused, then added with slight embarrassment, "I probably shouldn't be criticizing the job when I'm still so new." "You're not criticizing," Ethan assured her. "You're observing. There's a difference." Over the following days, Ethan crafted questions that would help him understand Clara's broader perspective on economic security and professional aspirations. "If you could change anything about your life right now," he asked during another break room conversation, "what would it be?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the table. "I guess I'd want my mom to be healthy again," she said finally. "And maybe I'd like to have one day where I don't have to worry every time I open my wallet." The simple honesty of her answer hit Ethan with unexpected force. Clara wasn't dreaming of luxury or fame or dramatic life changes. She wanted health for her mother and basic financial security for herself, fundamental needs that many people took for granted. "What does that kind of security look like to you?" Ethan pressed gently. "Being able to pay rent without counting down to the last possible day." Having enough money to buy my mom's medications without choosing between them and groceries. Maybe even saving a little bit for emergencies instead of living paycheck to paycheck. Clara's voice remained steady as she described this vision, but Ethan could hear the weight of current reality underlying her words. And professionally, do you have goals for your career? Clara looked surprised by the question, as if the idea of having career goals was a luxury she hadn't considered available to her. I used to think about maybe managing a coffee shop someday, or even opening my own place. But that was before. She gestured vaguely, encompassing the circumstances that had led her to Morrison's. Before what? Before I realized that some dreams are too expensive when you're just trying to survive. That evening, as Ethan drove home to his suburban house, he couldn't stop thinking about Clara's matter-of-fact acceptance of limited possibilities. He had built his business empire on the belief that anyone could achieve their goals through hard work and determination, but Clara was working harder than most people he knew, while seeing her options narrow rather than expand. More troubling was his growing recognition that Morrison's, his company, was structured in ways that kept employees like Clara focused on survival rather than growth. The wages, benefits, and advancement opportunities he had always considered competitive suddenly seemed inadequate when viewed through the lens of someone actually trying to live on them. Ethan realized that his undercover assignment was revealing problems that extended far beyond operational efficiency or customer service metrics. He was discovering that his company's success was built partly on the backs of employees whose dedication and hard work were not being adequately rewarded or supported. The question was what he intended to do with this knowledge, and whether Clara would be willing to trust him with the truth about her situation if she knew who he really was. 1 week later, Clara received a message that would change the trajectory of her life in ways she could never have anticipated. The store manager, Mrs. Henderson, approached her at the end of her Thursday shift with an unusual request. "Clara, I need you to report to the corporate office tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, Mrs. Henderson said, her tone carrying an official weight that immediately triggered Clara's anxiety. "Am I in trouble?" Clara asked, her voice barely concealing her panic. "Did I do something wrong with the register transactions?" Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "No, you're not in trouble. This is actually about a special program the company is piloting. Just report to the main building downtown and ask for the executive conference room." That evening, Clara lay awake on her living room couch, running through every interaction she'd had with customers and coworkers, trying to identify any mistakes that might have warranted corporate attention. The possibility of losing this job terrified her more than she had allowed herself to acknowledge. Her mother noticed Clara's distress during their evening routine of medication organization and blood sugar monitoring. "What's wrong, honey?" Patricia asked from her position in the bedroom doorway, leaning heavily on her walker. "I have to go to the corporate office tomorrow," Clara explained. "They won't tell me why, and I'm scared they're going to fire me." Patricia made her way slowly to the couch and sat beside her daughter. "You've been working so hard, Clara. Whatever this is about, I'm sure it's not because you've done anything wrong." But Clara's experience had taught her that good intentions and hard work didn't always protect against circumstances beyond her control. The next morning, Clara took 2 buses to reach Morrison's corporate headquarters, a sleek glass building that seemed to exist in a different world from the store where she worked. She wore her best outfit, a simple black dress she had bought for job interviews, and arrived 15 minutes early. The executive conference room was unlike anything Clara had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the polished conference table could easily seat 20 people. Clara sat in one of the leather chairs, feeling completely out of place and increasingly convinced that this meeting was not going to end well for her. When the door opened, Clara expected to see a human resources representative or perhaps a regional manager. Instead, Ethan walked through the door, but he looked completely different from the co-worker she had come to trust. Gone was the Morrison's uniform and baseball cap. Instead, Ethan wore an expensive tailored suit that fit him perfectly, and his entire demeanor radiated the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms like this one. But most shocking of all was the nameplate on the conference table that read, "Ethan Cole, Chief Executive Officer." Clara stared at him in complete bewilderment, her mind struggling to reconcile the seasonal employee who had found her crying in the break room with the obviously powerful executive standing before her. I imagine you have some questions, Ethan said gently, taking a seat across from her, rather than at the head of the table, which might have felt more intimidating. I don't understand, Clara said quietly. Are you really... I'm really the CEO of Morrison's, Ethan confirmed. For the past month, I've been working undercover in several of our stores to better understand the day-to-day operations and challenges facing our frontline employees. Clara's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized the implications of their conversations. Oh God, I complained about the job to the owner of the company. I'm so fired. Clara, you're not fired, Ethan said firmly. You're here because your story and your work ethic have convinced me that Morrison's needs to make some significant changes in how we support our employees. He leaned forward, his expression earnest and focused entirely on her. The night I found you in the break room, you were dealing with problems that no full-time employee should have to face while working for a profitable company. The fact that you've maintained such professionalism and compassion while managing those challenges tells me everything I need to know about your character and potential. Clara listened in stunned silence as Ethan continued. I've watched you go above and beyond for customers and coworkers every single day. I've seen you contribute your own money to help a customer afford medication. I've observed the way you train newer employees and volunteer for the most difficult assignments. Most importantly, I've seen how you've maintained your integrity and work ethic despite circumstances that would break most people. Ethan paused, then delivered the news that would change Clara's life. I'm offering you a position as Morrison's customer service training manager. You would be responsible for developing and implementing programs to improve customer interactions across all our stores. The position comes with a salary of $55,000 per year, full health benefits that would cover both you and your mother, and tuition assistance if you're interested in pursuing business management courses. Clara stared at him, certain she had misunderstood something fundamental about what he was saying. I'm sorry. What? You would be helping other employees develop the same customer service skills and compassion that you've demonstrated naturally, Ethan explained. Your experience working on the front lines gives you credibility and insight that can't be taught in business school. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in months, they were tears of relief rather than desperation. But I don't have management experience, she protested. I don't have a business degree. I'm just a cashier who's been working here for 3 weeks. You have something more valuable than credentials, Ethan replied. You have empathy, integrity, and the kind of work ethic that makes everyone around you better at their jobs. Those qualities can't be taught, but they can be supported and developed. He slid a folder across the table toward her. This contains the formal job offer and benefits package. Take some time to review it, but I hope you'll consider accepting. Clara opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning documents that represented more financial security than she had imagined possible. The salary alone was more than double what she had been earning, and the health benefits would cover her mother's expensive medications and treatments. Why me? She asked, looking up at Ethan with wonder rather than suspicion. Because you've shown me what Morrison's could be if we truly supported our employees instead of just asking them to support us, Ethan said simply. And because I believe you have the potential to help other people the way this opportunity is helping you. 6 months later, Clara stood in the training room of Morrison's newest location, watching a group of 12 new employees practice customer service scenarios with the kind of engaged enthusiasm she had rarely seen in corporate training sessions. She wore a professional blazer and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her true calling. Her position as customer service training manager had evolved beyond what either she or Ethan had initially envisioned, growing into a comprehensive program that addressed not just customer interaction techniques, but also employee wellness and career development. Remember, Clara told the trainees, every customer interaction is an opportunity to make someone's day a little better. Sometimes that means going beyond the basic transaction to really listen to what they need. One of the new employees, a young man named Marcus who reminded Clara of herself during those first overwhelming weeks, raised his hand. But what if helping them takes longer than we're supposed to spend per customer? Clara smiled, remembering her own fears about balancing compassion with efficiency. The most important thing I've learned is that genuine care usually makes interactions more efficient, not less. When customers feel heard and valued, they're more patient, more understanding, and more likely to become loyal to the store. As the training session concluded, Clara noticed Ethan standing in the doorway, observing with the same quiet attention he had brought to his undercover work months earlier. He had made these visits a monthly tradition, not to evaluate her performance, but to stay connected to the ground-level impact of the changes he had implemented throughout the Morrisons chain. After the employees left, Ethan joined Clara in the training room. "How are things going?" he asked, settling into one of the chairs arranged in a circle for group discussions. "Really well," Clara replied, and she meant it completely. "This group is particularly engaged. I think they're going to do great things." Through the window, Clara could see the main floor of the store, where employees moved through their tasks with the kind of purposeful energy that came from feeling valued and supported. The changes Ethan had made based on his undercover experience had transformed not just individual lives, but the entire culture of Morrison stores. Employee wages had been increased across the board. Health benefits had been expanded and made more affordable. Most importantly, advancement opportunities had been created that allowed dedicated employees to grow within the company rather than simply maintaining their positions. "I got a call from your mother yesterday," Ethan mentioned casually. Clara looked surprised. Over the months, Patricia had developed a friendship with Ethan that was based on their shared appreciation for Clara's strength and determination. "She wanted to let me know that her latest doctor's appointment went really well. The new treatment plan is working, and she's feeling stronger than she has in years." Clara felt the familiar warmth that came with good news about her mother's health. Patricia's improvement had been gradual but steady, aided both by better medical care and by the reduced stress that came with Clara's financial stability. "She also mentioned that you've been talking about maybe taking some business courses in the evening," Ethan continued. Clara nodded, feeling slightly embarrassed about her ambitions. "I know the tuition assistance covers it, but I wasn't sure if it was presumptuous to assume I could handle more responsibility." "Clara," Ethan said seriously, 6 months ago, you were managing impossible circumstances with grace and determination. Now you're transforming how an entire company thinks about employee development and customer service. I'd say you're ready for whatever challenges you want to take on." As they prepared to leave the training room, Clara paused to look back at the space where she spent her days helping other people develop skills and confidence. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," she admitted. "It's real because you made it real," Ethan replied. "The opportunity was just recognition of something that was already there." Clara smiled, understanding finally that her story wasn't about being rescued from difficult circumstances, but about being given the platform to show what she had always been capable of achieving. Do you believe that listening long enough can turn into a life-changing opportunity? Please subscribe to Hidden Heroine, where we celebrate the power of empathy to create miracles in everyday moments.